Welcome to Lead with Hope with Brandy Kelly, the podcast where we explore the power of hope, leadership, and resilience in today's world. Each week, we'll bring you stories, insights, and actionable advice from leaders, innovators, and change makers. So let's dive in and discover how you can lead with hope.
Hello, everybody. Today, I am honored to have Kim Strobel on the Lead with Hope podcast. Kim is a former teacher turned internationally known motivational speaker, dynamic powerhouse, and leading happiness coach. She inspires others to step into their power and live happier, less stressed lives. Drawing on positive psychology research, she teaches practical, science-backed strategies that help you achieve transformative results. Kim is a mother, she's a wife, she's a dedicated runner, and she's also a committed animal rescuer, having rescued 243 dogs. Wow. Welcome to the podcast, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brandy. Yes, it's like I feel like I'm, the animal control officer here where I live, unfortunately, because we don't have one. And so I do it because it's the right thing, but it's very heavy on my heart at times.
I'm sure that's a lot of dogs right there.
Yeah. I always say nobody cares about any other part of the bio except the dog part.
Yeah, I love that part. So, Kim, why don't we start off today? Other than a dog lover, why don't you tell us who you are, why you became an educator, and what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So I actually, let's see, I graduated from high school in 1992 and then went to college, but I quit after a year. I am someone who suffered from a very debilitating anxiety disorder called panic disorder that went undiagnosed for many years. So it all started when I always tell people I'm pretty high strung. I move fast. I talk fast. You can tell I have this nervous energy, and I've always been like that since I was a little girl. But when I was a sophomore in high school, I was sitting in my English language arts class, and within just 1 second, I felt this extreme terror come over me. My whole body began to shake uncontrollably. I was sweating. I was disoriented. I didn't know where I was. My brain didn't feel like it was working. I had feelings of unreality, just sweating. It was just the most frightening experience. And I ran out of the classroom and ran to the nurse's office, and that started for me from age 16 to about age 24 was just some really dark years of my life. I struggled to do the most basic of things. I struggled to leave my house, to walk to my mailbox, to drive my car 5 minutes to work. So obviously going away to college, I couldn't do it. I ended up quitting after a year and coming home and working at the prosecutor's office as a secretary, continuing to fight this demon that I didn't even know what it was. And then it got so bad that every 15 minutes of every day was just a real struggle for me, to be honest with you. And kind of had that moment on my bathroom bath mat floor where I really just kind of said, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to live. I want to live, but I can't live in this brain and body, and I don't know what's wrong with me. And I'm, 20, 22, 23, 24 years old, and I can't function like a normal human being. But it was actually kind of a spiritual awakening. I kind of got this message to get up off that bath mat and start fighting for my life. And I got into a doctor who finally said, Kim, this is what you have. You have an anxiety disorder. It's called panic disorder. You're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. And he ended up putting me on medicine, and he got me into psychotherapy, where I did the hardest work of my whole life. And then around that time, I believe the personal development field was coming to fruition, and I started to get my hands on books. And so I just became lit up with understanding that if I worked on the inside of myself, that was everything that was driving my outer results. And so I, in the midst of all that, did go back to college because I so badly wanted to get my teaching degree. And so I got my teaching degree, and when I got out of school, believe it or not, Brandy, there were no teaching jobs available. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but I went to work as a program assistant. I made $8 an hour. I was a single mom. I had a 2-month-old baby because I had divorced my husband after our baby was born. And so I tell people that I rode the special needs bus in the morning for an hour and in the afternoon for an hour, because that generated 16 extra dollars a day, and 16 times 5 was 80, and $80 back in the year 2000 paid my son's daycare bill.
Wow.
So I fought really hard to get to where I am.
Yeah.
And so, then I finally got my first teaching job, and I spent most of my time in 4th grade. And then I went on to become a literacy coordinator. And then I got my school admin license, and I became a curriculum director. And then I had this idea that was running in my head for a while, that I wanted to start my own business, Strobel Education. And so we launched in 2016, and we provide a lot of professional development. I think we have 17 different topics we present on. And I have like a team of gals that go into the field and do that work. And then I do the motivational speaking piece and run the back end of the business.
Yeah. And you said that you graduated from high school in 92?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great year.
Is that your year?
Vintage 1974, right?
You got it. We just turned 50, didn't we?
Yes, we sure did. We sure did. Got mixed
I'll take
feelings
50
about
over
that.
40 and 30 any day.
I've got mixed feelings about 50, but Brene Brown says owning your story and loving yourself through it is the bravest thing that you will ever do. And what you talked about there with your story, it just makes where you're at today in 2025 that much sweeter.
It does. And I think that sometimes, I still feel like I'm just so much more I want to do. And at times I feel behind. And then when I do a podcast interview and I'm reminded of what I've done to get to where I am, then I can kind of sit back and go, you know what, let's give yourself a little bit of credit and a little bit of grace for the hard that you've overcome in your life, because we forget that sometimes and we just think, oh, it's still not enough. It's still not enough,
Right. Absolutely. And this is the perfect podcast for that, because Lead with Hope is an intentional practice of self-reflection to improve your level of self-awareness and self-efficacy. And that's what I hope to do through the Lead with Hope system. And with the Lead with Hope system, H stands for habits. And before the show, I was doing a little bit of research, preparing for our conversation. And you talk about happiness habits. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would love to. I want to start with the happiness research, though, because that kind of leads straight into the habits. And so what we know is that as human beings, we all have baseline happiness levels. So maybe your baseline is here, Brandy, and maybe my baseline's a little bit higher than yours. And so what this means is that good things can happen in our lives. We get married, we get a new job, our kid gets into college, whatever it is, something good happens in our life, and we get a bump in happiness for a while. It might last 2 hours or 2 days or 2 months, but eventually it's going to go right back to whatever your baseline happiness level is. And what's really interesting is the same is true for when we endure really hard things, that as humans, we can endure loss and challenges and trauma and adversities and illness, and our levels will dip, but human brains have this uncanny ability to kind of reset back to whatever their baseline is. And then people say, well, why then, Kim, is your happiness baseline level a little bit higher than Brandy's maybe? And so if you picture your happiness as a pie chart, what we know is that 50% of your long-term happiness is genetic. And Brandy, when I tell people this, I'm telling you 80% of the crowd just puts their head down, and I hear them literally murmur, oh my gosh, I am so screwed. Like some of you, when I say 50% is genetic, you're going, please, no, this can't be true. But our brains are wired a certain way. And it's the reason that some of us can look at a French fry and gain 5 pounds and others can eat. There are these genetic tendencies. Now, I'm actually I'm a student of epigenetics, so I actually
Mhm.
believe that there are things we can do that will turn those genes on or off. But
Mhm.
for now, I need to follow Sonia Lubermisky and Sean Akers' research. 50% is genetic. But
Yeah.
where I think it gets really interesting is that we can take every external circumstance that a human has had from the time, they were a child all the way through into adulthood.
Mhm.
So, what kind of home were they raised in? Were their parents married, single, divorced, or widowed? Did they have siblings? Did they not have siblings? As an adult, what kind of money do they make? What kind of car do they drive? What kind of home do they live in? Do they need to lose weight? Do they not need to lose weight?
Mhm.
We can take all these external circumstances and throw them into the pie. And the research proves over and over again that all of those things only account for about 10% of long-term happiness. Now, if my husband tells me he's leaving me today, I can promise you that more than 10% of my happiness is going to be gone, as it rightly should, for a while. We aren't saying that no matter what's happening in your life, that it should not be stealing more than 10% of your happiness. And we also aren't including mental health disorders, which
Mhm.
are not included in that. But when we're looking at the big picture of long-term happiness,
Mhm.
what we know is that only about 10% of long-term happiness comes from those external circumstances. But if you're like Kim Strobel, you let some people and some things steal
Mhm.
way more than 10% for far too long.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that leaves 40% of the pie left, because
Mhm.
50% is genetics,
Mhm.
10% is external circumstances. And what we know is that regardless of those things, human beings can increase their happiness levels by up to 40%.
Okay.
And it has to do with these three things:
Mhm.
the thoughts you're thinking,
Mhm.
the actions you're taking, and the habits or behaviors that you're cultivating in your life.
Mhm.
And so when we intentionally put focus and energy towards those three things: habits, actions, and thoughts, we start to rewire the brain to be more positive than negative, neutral, or stressed. And the reason this is so important, and the reason I get called into, I just did a keynote for the FBI, of all people, to speak to happiness about. I'm like, these people are the most jaded people, and for good reason, right?
Right.
But they were so responsive to this, because we all want to get happier in our lives. And there's a lot of hope, as the name of your podcast, a lot
Right.
of hope there, that we have more personal control and agency over that than what we might think.
Mhm. Yeah, and I always say that, hope is not just wishful thinking. It is the habits or the behaviors and the actions that you take to move towards a state of mind or a goal or whatever it is that you're striving to achieve. And so when you talk about happiness habits, are there, we talk about return on investment. Are there higher leverage habits that you would encourage people to engage in?
Yes, there are. And I wrote a book about it. It's
Mhm.
called Teach Happy: Small Steps to Big Joy. And so that book all focuses on the 40%. But you are right, Brandy, in that there are a top 5 happiness habits that fall in the top 5 research-based ones. And I'll tell
Mhm.
you what they are, and I'm happy to explain at least one of them to
Okay.
your audience, because they're very important. So one is the practice of gratitude. Okay, so a daily gratitude practice, and I'll talk about that. The other is movement, 30 minutes a day. Move your body 30 minutes a day. The third one, and these are in no particular order, is a meditation practice of some sort. The fourth one is random acts of kindness. So just smiling at the cashier, thanking them for checking your groceries out fast,
Mhm.
saying hello to someone, complimenting them. Those are all little bitty things that we actually know ping our brain to get the hit even more than the person receiving the kindness. We get a bigger hit from that.
Mhm.
And then the fifth one is social connections. So the value of relationships in your life and in your workplace. And so when we cultivate those, we increase our happiness levels. And the reason this is so important is that we've been led to believe that when you achieve this goal, or when you marry the right person, or you get your bank account to a certain amount, or you find the right job, or you lose the weight, or whatever it is, that once you've jumped through all these hoops, then over there, you've arrived at happiness. But what we know from the last 30 years of positive psychology research is that that formula is backward. If you want to find more success in your life, if you want to have more success in your marriage, in your partnership, if you want to have more success in your financial life, if you want to have more success in your social life, if you want to have more success in your physical health, all of those things only happen when you learn to prioritize your happiness first.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really that happiness is the thing that drives those levels of success to increase in every area. Formula backward, right? We mostly think, okay, if I can just achieve this, then I'm going to be happy.
Right.
But it's really teaching, and I think this is especially hard for females to understand, that they are allowed to prioritize their happiness and well-being, and that when they do that, that they will begin to see a shift in every other area of their life. But we are, as females, we mostly feel guilty if we put ourselves ahead of anybody else, because we've been raised by generations of women who modeled for us that is not the formula that you follow.
Right. And like you're talking about there, it starts with that mindset. And my system, I call it an optimistic outlook. It starts with the way you look at the world, or the lens you look at the world through. And what you're talking about there is, because we prioritize ourselves, because we have that, or we don't prioritize ourselves, rather, we have that mindset that kind of brings about the guilt and the shame, and a cycle that is very difficult to get out of. So, I would say, to practice happiness habits, you have to have an optimistic outlook, and you have to be able to prioritize self-care.
You do. You really, you might not have that positive outlook yet, but you have to push through those uncomfortable feelings and do these things that we're teaching you to do in the book, because eventually what we're going to be able to do is rewire your brain so that you'll start to make moves in your life without so much guilt. But I always tell people, if you're going to wait to make these moves in your life until you feel good, you'll never make it happen. So I want you to feel guilty that you've said, you know what, I'm not putting the kid down for bed every single night. We're actually going to share this responsibility because mom needs 30 minutes to herself.
Right.
And yes, I'm going to feel guilty that I didn't do that, but feel the guilt and then make this move anyway, because we want you to be the best version of yourself, showing up as a mother, showing up as a career woman, showing up as whatever, for yourself. And we're just really not wired to know that that's okay to do that.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that, when you look at the system of hope with habits, your happiness habits, for instance, that optimistic outlook, your passion, your purpose, your perseverance, it's all required in order to achieve excellence in our life. And that's what we're striving for, is to have a life that is fulfilled, that is well lived. And that's going to look different for every person.
Yes, it is. And talking about positivity, because I believe some positivity can be toxic. And I want to acknowledge that you and I both know that we have to be able to acknowledge the disappointing, the hard, the stress, the sadness in our life. That's a really important component on it, and not to just brush over that. But we do have to then be able to get ourselves out of the gutter. And, one of the reasons when people have me come in and speak to their schools about cultivating these happiness habits, it's because when I can teach their employees' brains to get to positive versus negative, neutral, or stressed, you are going to be 31% more productive at your job, Brandy. A positive brain is 31% more productive than a brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. A positive brain is going to be 10 times more engaged in its job. 10 times, which means you're going to get a lot more done a lot quicker than that whole like, just put your head to the grindstone, don't leave until it's all done, exhaust yourself, have nothing left for. That
Mhm.
does not work. And so when we really teach this culture of well-being and cultivating these happiness habits within the system, the whole ecosystem begins to flourish for the good.
Now, do you think that when people are engaging in these happiness habits, the 5 happiness habits that you talked about, um, does it make it easier for them to set boundaries? Because that's something that I see in our schools is, like you said, teachers, they give and they give and they give, and then they just reach that point of burnout, or they just feel taken for granted, or whatever emotion that comes from that. Boundaries are lacking, and it's a mindset thing. It's what we've been raised to believe, that if you're not staying late and coming early and giving everything, you're not doing enough, and that's just not true.
It isn't. Most people, I think, who go into the field of education, most of us are type A,
Mhm.
ambitious, and
Yeah.
perfectionistic in nature. And we do not realize, like, we can acknowledge the system's out of control. The education system completely demands too much out of us. We know this.
Hmm.
But I never want to focus on things that we can't control, and we
Right.
cannot control that beast. The only thing that you can control is yourself.
Hmm.
But that means you have to get out of your own darn way. You
Yeah.
have to get rid of the perfectionism. You have to be willing to let some things go. And when you start to chip away at this, it will feel uncomfortable, but you will begin to create so much more space and ease and flow in your life. And for me, I just feel like I'm a walking study of it. I feel like I'm somebody who said, you know what? This research blows my brain. Let me just see if this
Hmm.
really does work. And, for me, I knocked 3 out of the first 5 happiness habits out first thing in the day, because I get up early. I do my meditation. I go mix up my protein shakes. I sit with my journal. I do my 3, you just have to do 3 daily gratitudes. I do 5. And then I write my affirmations, and then I put my sneakers on and I go for my run. And so, if I'm like in the month of August, I might be in a different state every single day on a different stage. It doesn't matter if I get into the airport at midnight, Brandy, and if I have to get up at 4 o'clock the next morning so that I can get those habits in. There's no part of me that's not going to do that, because if Kim Strobel is going to show up as the best version of herself that day, she's
Hmm.
got to get that discipline done. And
Yeah.
I don't always feel motivated, right? I don't always feel motivated. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline.
Yeah. I was just having this conversation with a teacher today at school, and she was talking about her need to improve her time management skills. I don't think it's about time management. I think it's about investing in yourself and being able to say no and setting boundaries and doing the things that you need to do to cultivate the life that you want to live. And it's definitely an intentional practice, and I do believe it takes self-reflection, but it also takes discipline. So how do you encourage the people that you're working with to engage in these disciplines or these habits, who maybe haven't done this previously?
Yeah. And what I would say is, maybe get the book, Teach Happy, and then you'll go through it. And I want you to just pick one teeny tiny habit. That's the other thing, is that we sometimes think that we bite off these like really big goals. And I love big, bold goals. I do. But I also understand that when we're talking about habits, it's picking one teeny tiny habit to move the needle by just a 1%. And habits work like combined interest in your life. There's like this invisible force that starts to happen, and you don't really see the money building, but like it's happening in the background. There's this snowball effect taking
Right.
place. And then all of a sudden, with combined interest, many years later, the tiny little snowball is now a big snowball. And
Mhm.
so the same thing happens with our habits, but we just have to start out slow. I've been practicing this for 20 years. So obviously, most days I knock it out of the ballpark. But if I was just starting out, I would
Mhm.
say, I want you to pick one teeny tiny habit, and I want you to work on that habit for 21 to 30 days, because that's when your brain's going to start to rewire. And that's also when you're going to start to see a little bit like, gosh, I am feeling a little bit better. I am looking through a different lens throughout my day. More good is popping than more bad. And you will start to see maybe little bitty shifts, but it's really not until one day you go, wow, life just feels a whole lot better. And I know why it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's operating out of that abundance mentality instead of the deficit model that we've all been conditioned to operate under. And so I love the habits, and my favorite, I think, is the practice of gratitude. There's so much
Yes.
to be, we are blessed people. We are very fortunate to have so many of the things in our lives that we have: family, friends, coworkers. I mean, life is a blessing, but you have to look at it that way.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to pop a link here in the chat box. So I have what's called a gratitude prompt and
Mm.
tracker
Okay.
that will help people who want to start the gratitude practice to start looking at 5 different areas in their life to find gratitude. So it just kind of gets your brain going,
Yeah.
knowing where to look for those. And then there is a tracker there. I personally just use a notebook and I just put the date and then I write the words, I am thankful,
Mm-hmm.
because I am thankful are 3 of the most powerful words. They actually
Mm-hmm.
hold a vibrational frequency about them. And then I encourage people that you are to write 3 different things every single day for at least 21 days. They need to be different things. And I want you to be specific. This is a 2-minute daily practice. It only takes 2 minutes. But don't just say, I'm thankful for my health. Say, I'm thankful for my body that allows me to walk a mile every day. Don't just say, I'm thankful for my family. Say, I'm thankful that on Thursday nights we have pizza night with my parents. And I want you to be specific. And the reason the gratitude one is so powerful is because humans have about 70,000 thoughts a day. And if you're an average human, 80% of your thoughts are negative
Mm-hmm.
in a day's time. So that means that most of us put our head on the pillow at night and we've had 56,000 negative thoughts because our brain is wired that way. And what's really crazy is that 95% of the 80% of negative thoughts that we're having are the exact same thoughts you had the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And so our brains just automatically go down these same roadways over and over and over again. And when you start a gratitude practice, all of a sudden you start taking a different roadway, and that roadway gets deeper and deeper, which means more and more good is pinging in your life. And then once you do that, you have a whole new neural feedback system going on in your brain. And you've now changed your brain from pessimism to optimism.
Yeah. And it's an intentional practice that you have to engage in day after day after day.
Yeah.
But it all starts with just one simple habit.
Yeah. And I did it with my students, my 4th grade students. We did it. We start every day with 90 seconds of gratitude, and they would just go around the room and say something they're thankful for. And then at the end of the day, they would get their little gratitude journals out and they would write their gratitudes, so incorporate it into your own day, get it done at school if you want.
Yeah.
If you don't feel like you have time in the mornings or before you go to bed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love this. And I could talk about this stuff all day long. This is totally right down my but we are coming up on 30 minutes, and I like to keep it around 30 minutes. So, Kim, before we go, as we're wrapping up the podcast today, for people who want to get in contact with you and want to learn more about your work, or maybe they're interested in bringing you to their school or their organization, how can they get in contact with you?
Yep. They can just go to strobeleducation.com. I did pop it in the chat box, but it's just STROBEL education.com. And then you can find, we have online courses, we have on-site PD, and then of course we have the keynote. So I would love that. I would love to come to your school and do the Science of Happiness is my #1 keynote. That's the one we get called for the most.
I love it. And I think that it's so needed in our world today. We need to shift our thinking from the negative to the positive. And I do believe what we focus on is what we grow. So let's grow some happiness in our lives and let's lead with hope. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.